Welcome, dear listeners, to Boring Mythology for Sleep. I'm so glad you've joined us tonight. Find yourself a comfortable position, let your body sink into the softness beneath you, and allow your breathing to slow and deepen. Tonight, we journey back through the mists of time to ancient Greece, to a story you may think you know, but perhaps have never truly heard in its entirety. This is the story of Medusa. Not the monster from your childhood nightmares, but the woman she once was. The beautiful maiden with flowing hair who walked beneath Mediterranean skies, who laughed with her sisters, who dreamed of love and life and all the possibilities that stretched before her like the endless horizon of the sea. Tonight, we will walk with her through sun-dappled temple corridors. We will witness her joy, her devotion, her innocence. And we will stay with her through the darkness that followed, through transformation and exile, through centuries of solitude and the final moments of her long, strange life. So settle in. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Let the weight of the day drain away from your shoulders, your neck, your jaw. If you enjoy this journey through ancient myth and find yourself drifting peacefully towards sleep, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us create more of these gentle journeys into the stories of old. Now, let us begin. Let us travel back more than 3,000 years, to a time when gods walked among mortals, and the line between the divine and the human was as thin as morning mist. In the beginning, there was beauty. This is important to remember. Before there was horror, before there was curse, before there was stone and serpents and silence, there was simply a young woman named Medusa, and she was beautiful. She lived in the city of Athens, that great jewel of ancient Greece, where marble columns reached toward cloudless skies and the scent of olive blossoms drifted through narrow streets. The year does not matter. Perhaps it was no year that our modern calendars would recognize. Perhaps it existed only in that eternal time of myth, where stories breathe and live outside the constraints of history. Medusa was the youngest of three sisters, daughters of Phorcys and Ceto, ancient deities of the sea. But while her sisters, Stheno and Uriel, were born immortal and strange, with certain divine qualities that set them apart from mortals, Medusa was different. She had been born mortal, fully human, soft and vulnerable and temporary as a summer flower. Some said this was a gift. Others would later call it a curse. Perhaps it was simply her fate. Her beauty was remarkable even in a land known for beautiful women. Her hair fell in waves the color of polished bronze, catching light like copper threads woven by patient gods. Her eyes were the deep green of the Aegean Sea in summer, flecked with gold like sunlight dancing on water. Her skin was smooth and sun-kissed, the color of honey. When she walked through the agora, the marketplace, conversations would pause. Not in a crude or uncomfortable way, but in that moment of appreciation one might have when seeing a particularly stunning sunset or a perfect rose in full bloom. But Medusa was not vain. Her mother had raised her to understand that beauty was merely an accident of birth, as meaningless as the color of one's eyes or the shape of one's hands. What mattered was character. What mattered was devotion, service, kindness, wisdom. From a young age, Medusa felt called to the sacred. While other girls her age dreamed of marriage and children, of managing households and hosting gatherings, Medusa found herself drawn to the temples. She loved the cool quiet within those sacred walls, The way incense smoke curled upward like prayers made visible the sense of being part of something larger than herself. When she was 16 years old, she made a decision that would shape the entire course of her existence. She chose to dedicate her life to Athena, goddess of wisdom, warfare, and crafts. She would become a priestess, a temple maiden, giving up all thoughts of marriage or family to serve the divine. The process of becoming a priestess was not simple. It required commitment, training, sacrifice. Medusa approached it with the same dedication she brought to everything. She learned the prayers and rituals, the proper ways to prepare offerings, the sacred calendar with all its festivals and observances. She studied philosophy and mathematics, astronomy and poetry, for Athena valued wisdom above all things, and her priestesses were expected to be learned as well as pious. Most importantly, she took the vow of chastity. This was non-negotiable for priestesses of Athena, the virgin goddess. To serve Athena meant to reject romantic and physical love, to remain pure and untouched, devoted only to the divine. Medusa took this vow seriously, sincerely, without hesitation or doubt. She wanted nothing more than to serve her goddess with a whole and undivided heart. The temple of Athena in Athens was magnificent. Its great columns rose like a forest of stone, and within its walls, everything spoke of divine presence. Medusa felt at peace there in a way she felt nowhere else. When she swept the marble floors in the early morning, when the city was still asleep and pale light filtered through the columns, she felt closer to the divine than she ever had in prayer. She was not alone in her service. There were other priestesses, other temple maidens, women of various ages who had dedicated their lives to Athena. They became her sisters in a way that transcended even blood. They shared meals together, studied together, performed rituals together. They comforted each other in times of doubt and celebrated together in times of joy. Among them was a woman named Callista, perhaps 10 years older than Medusa, who became something of a mentor to her. Callista had served Athena since she was younger than Medusa, and she knew all the intricacies of temple life, all the unspoken rules and subtle expectations. The goddess values sincerity above perfection, Callista told Medusa one evening as they prepared oil lamps for the next day's rituals. She knows our hearts. She knows our intentions. What matters is not that we perform every ritual flawlessly, but that we come to our service with genuine devotion. Medusa absorbed these teachings like parched earth absorbing rain. She wanted to be the best priestess she could be, not out of pride, but out of love for Athena and gratitude for the purpose she had found in this life. Years passed in this peaceful rhythm. Medusa grew from a 16-year-old girl into a woman of 20, then 22, then 25. Her beauty did not fade but deepened, took on new dimensions. There was a serenity to her now, a groundedness that came from knowing her place in the world and being content with it. She still turned heads when she ventured into the city to purchase supplies for the temple or to attend civic ceremonies. But she barely noticed. Her mind was on higher things. On the philosophical questions she and her fellow priestesses debated in the evenings. On the prayers she memorized and spoke with increasing understanding. On the feeling of the goddess's presence, which she sometimes sensed like a subtle warmth in her chest when she stood before Athena's great statue in the temple's inner sanctum. She had no way of knowing that this peace, this purpose, this beautiful life she had built was about to shatter like a clay vessel dropped on stone. She had no way of knowing that the gods were watching her. And one god in particular had noticed her in a way that would change everything. Poseidon, lord of the seas, earthshaker, stormbringer, had ruled over the oceans and all their depths since the ancient division of the world among the three brother gods. Zeus had taken the sky, Hades the underworld, and Poseidon the vast waters that covered most of the earth. His palace beneath the waves was said to be more magnificent than anything on land, built of coral and pearl and precious metals that never corroded in the salt water. But Poseidon was not content with the sea alone. He desired influence on land as well, and he frequently interfered in mortal affairs, claiming cities for his patronage, pursuing mortal women who caught his eye, stirring up trouble with his brother gods. He was powerful and proud, easily offended and quick to anger. When he was pleased, he might grant safe passage to sailors and bring forth fresh water from bare rock. When he was angry, he could destroy entire cities with earthquakes and floods, could summon sea monsters to terrorize coastlines, could drown 1,000 men with a casual thought. He was, in many ways, the embodiment of the sea itself. Beautiful and terrible, life-giving and deadly, calm one moment and raging the next. The rivalry between Poseidon and Athena was ancient and well-known. They had once competed for patronage of the city of Athens itself. Each had offered a gift to the people. Poseidon struck his trident against the rock of the Acropolis and brought forth a saltwater spring. Athena planted an olive tree, offering the people food, oil, and wood. The people chose Athena's gift, and the city bore her name. Poseidon had never quite forgiven this slight. Perhaps this is why Medusa caught his attention. Perhaps he saw her, radiant in her devotion to his rival, and something dark stirred in his heart. Or perhaps it was simpler than that. Perhaps he simply desired her, as he had desired countless mortal women before, and gave no thought to the complications and consequences. The gods are not like us. They do not think as we think, feel as we feel. They are vast and ancient and strange, and their desires operate on a scale we cannot fully comprehend. To attribute human motivations to them is to misunderstand their nature. But this much is clear: Poseidon wanted Medusa, and when a god wants something, the universe itself seems to bend to make it happen. He began appearing to her in dreams. At first, they were pleasant dreams, harmless. She would dream of the sea, of walking along a beach at sunset, of the gentle sound of waves against sand. She would wake feeling peaceful, refreshed, not understanding that these dreams were being sent to her, that they were a kind of courtship, a god testing the waters of her mind. Then the dreams became more direct. She would see a man in them, tall and powerful, with hair the color of sea foam and eyes like the deep ocean. He would smile at her, reach out his hand. She would wake before touching him, her heart pounding, a strange mixture of fear and fascination swirling in her chest. She mentioned these dreams to no one. They felt too private, too strange. And besides, what could they mean? They were only dreams. But Poseidon was patient. He had existed for eons. He could wait. He could plan. He could seduce slowly, carefully, wearing down resistance like water wearing down stone. He began appearing to her in waking visions. She would be sweeping the temple floor and catch a glimpse of movement from the corner of her eye. When she turned, there would be nothing. She would be preparing offerings and feel the sensation of being watched, but when she looked around, she would be alone. These moments unsettled her, but she attributed them to fatigue, to an overactive imagination. She prayed to Athena for clarity of mind and continued her duties. Then came the day when Poseidon revealed himself fully. It was late afternoon, and Medusa was alone in the temple. The other priestesses had gone into the city for a festival, but Medusa had volunteered to stay behind to tend to the eternal flame and ensure the temple remained properly maintained. She enjoyed these quiet times alone, found them meditative and restorative. She was kneeling before the altar, trimming the wick of an oil lamp, when she felt a presence behind her. Not the gentle, warming presence she associated with Athena, but something else. Something powerful and overwhelming and undeniably masculine. She turned, and there he was. Poseidon, in all his divine glory, standing in the temple of his rival. He was magnificent and terrible, his form almost too bright to look at directly, radiating power like heat radiating from a fire. Medusa's first instinct was to bow, to show respect to a god, any god. But something in his expression stopped her. There was hunger in his eyes, a want that made her deeply uncomfortable. "Lord Poseidon," she managed to say, her voice shaking. "You honor this temple with your presence, but I must remind you that this is Athena's sacred space. Perhaps you have come to leave an offering to." "I have not come for Athena," Poseidon interrupted, his voice like waves crashing against rocks. "I have come for you, Medusa. I have watched you for months now. Your beauty has captivated me. Your devotion is charming, but misplaced. Athena is a cold goddess, a virgin who rejects the pleasures of love. But I could show you wonders beyond her wisdom. I could give you immortality, power, treasures beyond imagination. All you need do is accept me." Terror flooded through Medusa like ice water. She understood now what was happening, what he wanted. And she understood the terrible danger she was in. One did not simply refuse a god. Gods were accustomed to getting what they wanted, and those who refused them often met terrible fates. But she had made vows. Sacred vows to Athena, to remain chaste, to devote herself wholly to the goddess. To break those vows, even under duress, would be to betray everything she had built her life upon. "My lord," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I am honored by your attention, but I cannot accept. I have made vows of chastity to the goddess Athena. These vows are sacred to me. They are the foundation of my life and service. I must respectfully decline your offer and ask that you respect the sanctity of this temple and leave me in peace." For a moment, Poseidon simply stared at her, as if he could not quite believe what he had heard. Gods were not accustomed to rejection, especially not from mortals. His expression darkened like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "You refuse me?" His voice had taken on an edge now, a dangerous quality like the rumble of thunder before a storm breaks. "You, a mere mortal, dare to refuse a god?" Medusa wanted to fall to her knees, to beg for mercy, to take back her words. Survival instinct screamed at her to do whatever necessary to appease this angry god. But something deeper, something stronger, held her upright. Her integrity. Her vows. Her sense of self. "I mean no disrespect, my lord," she said, and she was proud that her voice remained steady. "But I cannot break my vows. Not for anyone. Not even for a god." What happened next happened quickly, too quickly for her to react or flee. Poseidon's expression twisted with rage and inept pride. The air in the temple grew heavy, oppressive, charged with divine anger. And then he moved toward her with impossible speed. Medusa tried to run, but there was nowhere to run to. She tried to scream, but the sound died in her throat. She called out in her mind to Athena, prayed desperately for intervention, for protection, for mercy. But no help came. Or perhaps it came too late. Or perhaps the gods simply do not intervene in each other's affairs, even when mortal lives hang in the balance. Poseidon took what he wanted in Athena's own temple, on the sacred floor before the goddess's altar. It was an act of violence, of divine assault, of desecration. And when it was over, when Poseidon had vanished back to his underwater realm as quickly as he had appeared, Medusa was left alone on the cold marble floor, her robes torn, her body shaking with shock and pain and violation. She lay there for a long time, unable to move, unable to think, unable to process what had just happened. The eternal flame flickered nearby, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, she could hear the distant sounds of the city, normal life continuing as if the entire world had not just shattered. Eventually, she found the strength to stand. She gathered her torn robes around herself and stumbled to the temple's bathing chamber. She washed herself mechanically, scrubbing her skin until it was raw, trying to wash away the violation, though she knew it would never truly wash away. She did not cry. She felt too numb for tears, too shocked, too broken. She had done nothing wrong. She had refused as politely as she could. She had defended her vows, her integrity. And yet she had been punished for it, violated for it, used and discarded like she meant nothing. And then, as the shock began to wear off and reality began to seep back in, a new horror occurred to her. Athena. What would Athena think? The goddess valued chastity above almost all else in her priestesses. The vow had been broken, even though Medusa had not broken it willingly. Would Athena understand? Would she offer comfort to her priestess who had been so terribly wronged? Or would she see only that her temple had been defiled, her rival had triumphed, her priestess was no longer pure? Medusa did not have to wait long for her answer that night, as Medusa lay sleepless in her small chamber within the temple complex, trying to make sense of the senseless, trying to find some way forward from this horror. She felt the presence again. But this time it was different. This time it was the presence she knew well, had felt 1,000 times before in prayer and meditation. Athena had come. For one brief, desperate moment, Medusa felt hope surge in her chest. The goddess had come to comfort her, to tell her that she understood, that she knew Medusa was blameless, that justice would be served against Poseidon for his violation of both a priestess and a sacred space. But when the goddess manifested in the dim chamber, her face was not filled with compassion. It was filled with cold, terrible fury. "You have defiled my temple," Athena said, her voice sharp as a blade. "You have broken your sacred vows. You have allowed my greatest rival to violate the sanctity of my most holy space." Medusa struggled to sit up, to speak, to defend herself. "Goddess, please, I did not allow, I refused him. I tried to stop." Silence. Athena's voice rang through the small chamber like a bell. "Do you think the details matter? Do you think your intentions absolve you? My temple has been desecrated. My priestess is no longer pure. This cannot stand. This cannot be unpunished. But I am the victim here." Medusa's voice broke, tears finally coming, streaming down her face. "I was attacked. I was violated. I did nothing wrong. Please, goddess, please understand. I remained faithful to you. I defended my vows with everything I had. But gods do not think as mortals think. They do not feel as mortals feel." And Athena, in her divine fury at Poseidon's insult, at the violation of her temple, could not or would not see Medusa as anything other than part of the problem that needed to be solved. "You will be punished," Athena said coldly. "You will bear the mark of what has occurred." You will become a warning to all who would defile my temples, whether willingly or not. You will become a creature of horror, so that all who look upon you will turn away in fear and disgust. No, Medusa whispered, shaking her head, backing away until her back hit the wall. No, please, goddess, please don't do this. I served you faithfully. I loved you. I gave you everything, but Athena had already begun the transformation. Her hand rose, and power flowed from her like lightning, like liquid silver, like nothing that can be adequately described in mortal language. The pain was indescribable. Medusa felt her body changing, mutating, becoming something other than what it had been. Her beautiful bronze hair began to writhe and twist, each strand separating, thickening, becoming something alive and serpentine. Within moments, her head was crowned not with hair but with dozens of living snakes, hissing and coiling around her face. Her skin, once soft and warm, became cold and scaly in places, taking on a greenish tint. Her eyes, those beautiful sea-green eyes, became something else entirely. They took on a terrible power, a curse within the curse. Anyone who looked directly into those eyes would turn to stone, frozen forever in the moment of their gaze. Her hands became clawed, her feet partially transformed. Wings, leathery and bat-like, sprouted from her back. She was being remade into a monster, a gorgon, a creature of nightmare. And through it all, she screamed. She screamed in pain, in horror, in betrayal, in grief for everything she was losing. Her beauty, her humanity, her life of service and purpose, all of it being stripped away because she had been the victim of a god's violence. When the transformation was complete, Athena looked down at her former priestess with cold satisfaction. You will flee from this place, the goddess commanded. You will go to the ends of the earth, where no one will have to look upon your hideous form. And if any are foolish enough to seek you out, they will meet the fate your gaze bestows. You are no longer welcome in my temple, no longer welcome in any temple. You are anathema, cursed, monster. And then Athena was gone, leaving Medusa alone in the darkness with her new form, her new existence, her new eternal punishment for a crime she did not commit. Medusa did not scream anymore. She had no more screams left in her. She simply sat in the darkness, feeling the snakes move on her head, feeling the wrongness of her new body, feeling the complete and total destruction of everything she had been. When dawn came, pale light filtering through the small window of her chamber, she knew she had to leave. She could not bear the thought of her sister priestesses seeing what she had become. She could not bear their fear, their disgust, their rejection. She gathered what few possessions she could carry. A cloak to cover her monstrous form. Some food. A water skin. And then, before anyone else woke, she fled from the only home she had known for nearly a decade, fled from the temple she had loved, fled from the life she had built. She ran through the awakening city with her hood pulled low over her face, her snakes hissing softly beneath the fabric. Once, a merchant caught a glimpse of her face and screamed. She ran faster, tears streaming down her changed face. She fled Athens entirely, heading west toward the wilderness, toward the edges of the civilized world, toward anywhere she might hide herself away from humanity. Behind her, she left everything. Her friends, her sisters in service, her purpose, her identity. All of it gone, destroyed in a single night because the gods had their rivalries and their pride, and mortals were simply pieces in their games. The journey to the edges of the known world took months. Medusa traveled only at night, hiding during the day in caves or abandoned structures or deep in forests where no one would stumble upon her. She learned quickly to avoid all human contact. The few times someone caught sight of her, saw her true form, They either fled in terror or, if they looked directly into her eyes, became stone where they stood. She did not want to kill. Each stone statue she left behind was another weight on her soul, another piece of evidence that she had become the monster they said she was. But she could not control the curse in her gaze. It simply was. Anyone who looked into her eyes turned to stone, frozen forever, dead but preserved in perfect detail. So she learned to avoid eye contact entirely. She kept her head down, her eyes averted. She spoke to no one. She became a shadow, a ghost, a whispered rumor in villages she passed near. She traveled west through Greece, then further west still, following the coastline, drawn perhaps by some vestige of her connection to the sea through her divine parentage. She passed through lands that had no names she knew, crossed rivers and mountains, survived on what she could hunt or gather, avoiding civilization entirely. Finally, after months of wandering, she came to a place that seemed suitable for permanent exile. It was a small island off the coast of what would later be called Libya, though in those days it had another name or perhaps no name at all. The island was rocky and barren, with few resources and no reason for ships to stop there. It had a freshwater spring and enough vegetation to support limited hunting. Most importantly, it was isolated, lonely, perfect for someone who needed to hide from the world. There was a cave system on the northern side of the island, facing away from the shipping lanes. Medusa chose the largest of these caves as her new home. It was dark and cold and utterly unlike the beautiful temple she had once called home, but it was safe. No one would stumble upon her here by accident. She set about making the cave as livable as possible. She gathered dried grass and leaves to make a bed. She found flat stones to use as surfaces for preparing food. She created a small area near the cave entrance where she could sit and look out at the sea without being easily visible from any passing ships. The loneliness was crushing. Humans are social creatures, made for connection and community. Medusa had gone from a life surrounded by her sister priestesses, full of conversation and companionship, to utter isolation. She had no one to talk to except herself and the serpents that writhed on her head. At first, she hated the snakes. They were a constant reminder of her curse, moving independently of her will, hissing their alien language. But gradually, over weeks and months, she began to form a strange relationship with them. They were, after all, part of her now. They shared her body, her existence. She began naming them. The largest one, which usually coiled at the crown of her head, she called Agamede. There was a smaller, more aggressive one she named Cleo. Another, which seemed gentler than the rest, became Fear. On and on, until all the serpents had names, had identities beyond just being part of the curse. They could not speak, of course, but she spoke to them. She told them about her day, about what she had hunted or gathered, about the weather, about her memories of her old life. It was better than talking to herself, and the snakes seemed to listen, their heads turning toward her voice, their tongues flicking out to taste the air. The seasons turned. Summer gave way to autumn, autumn to winter. Winter was harsh on the island, with cold winds whipping across the barren landscape and little to eat. Medusa survived, barely, subsisting on what few fish she could catch, on the meager roots and tubers she could dig from the frozen ground. Spring came eventually, as it always does, and with it a return of life to the island. Birds began nesting on the cliffs. The few trees that grew in sheltered spots budded and bloomed. The sea became less violent, its waves gentler, its color changing from winter gray to something closer to blue. Medusa established routines to give structure to her days. She would wake at dawn and go to the spring to wash and collect water. She would spend the morning hunting or gathering food. The afternoons were for maintaining her cave, for crafting what simple tools and furnishings she could manage. The evenings were for sitting at the cave entrance, watching the sun set over the sea, remembering what it had felt like to be human. Sometimes ships would pass in the distance. She would watch them from the shadows of her cave, hidden, observing the tiny figures moving on the decks. She wondered about their lives, their destinations, their stories. She longed to call out to them, to beg them to take her anywhere but here. But she knew what would happen if she did. They would see her, look into her eyes, and turn to stone. More deaths on her conscience, more evidence of the monster she had become. Years passed. 1 year became 5, became 10, became 20. Medusa lost track of time. Without calendars or festivals or any markers beyond the changing seasons, the years blurred together. She estimated that perhaps 30 years had passed since she had fled Athens, though it could have been less or more. She changed during these decades of solitude, though not physically. Her cursed form remained constant, unchanging. But mentally, emotionally, she evolved. The grief and anger and betrayal that had consumed her in the early years gradually transformed into something else. Not acceptance, exactly, but a kind of weary resignation. This was her life now. This was what she had become. Raging against it changed nothing. She developed a strange sort of peace with her existence. She learned to appreciate the small beauties available to her. The way sunlight caught on the waves. The cry of seabirds. The taste of fresh water from the spring. The warmth of sun on her scaly skin during summer afternoons. She also developed a kind of wisdom, the hard-won wisdom that comes from suffering and solitude and having unlimited time to think. She thought deeply about the nature of justice, about the ways power corrupts, about the casual cruelty of the gods toward those who cannot defend themselves. She thought about beauty and its value, about how her appearance had once been praised and now was reviled, though she was still the same person inside. She wondered sometimes if Athena ever thought of her, ever regretted the curse she had placed on an innocent priestess. She doubted it. Gods did not seem to experience regret the way mortals did. She wondered about Poseidon too, the god who had set all this in motion with his violent desire. Did he even remember her? Did he know or care what had become of her? Probably not. She was just one of countless mortals he had wronged over his long existence. The isolation took its toll in other ways. She began talking to herself more and more, holding entire conversations where she played both parts. She created elaborate fantasies where she was rescued, where the curse was broken, where she could return to society and rebuild some semblance of a normal life. But they were just fantasies, and she knew it. Sometimes she thought about ending her existence. She was mortal, after all, unlike her immortal sisters. She could die if she chose to. She could walk into the sea and let it take her, or throw herself from the cliffs, or simply stop eating and drinking and let nature take its course. But something always stopped her. Some stubborn core of survival, of determination, of refusal to let the gods win completely. She had been wronged terribly, transformed into a monster for a crime she did not commit. But she was still herself inside. Still Medusa, the girl who had loved learning and prayer and the quiet moments in the temple at dawn. Still the woman who had remained true to her vows even in the face of a god's wrath. She would not let them take that from her. She would survive. She would endure. She would find meaning in this meaningless existence, beauty in this cursed form, purpose in this purposeless exile. And so the years continued to pass, slow and endless as the waves that crashed against the rocks below her cave. Medusa, the monster, the Gorgon, lived on her lonely island, waiting for nothing, hoping for nothing, simply existing day after day after day. Until the day the hero came. In the 40th year of Medusa's exile, or perhaps the 50th, she had long since stopped counting precisely. A prophecy was spoken in the kingdom of Argos, far across the sea from her lonely island. King Acrisius of Argos had a beautiful daughter named Danae. An oracle had told him that his daughter would bear a son who would one day kill him. In his fear, Acrisius locked Danae in a bronze chamber underground, where no man could reach her. But Zeus, king of the gods, desired Danae. And gods cannot be kept out by bronze or stone or any mortal barrier. He came to her as a shower of golden light, and from their union, a son was born. Perseus. When Acrisius discovered his grandson, he was terrified of the prophecy. But he could not bring himself to kill the child directly. Instead, he sealed Danae and baby Perseus in a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, leaving their fate to the gods. The chest washed ashore on the island of Sorrowful, where a kind fisherman named Dictys found them and took them in. Perseus grew up there, raised by his mother and the fisherman who had saved them. He became strong and brave and clever, all the qualities one expects in a hero. But the king of Sorrowful, Polydectes, desired Danae for himself. Perseus, now a young man, stood in his way. So Polydectes devised a plan to rid himself of the young hero. He announced that he would marry a different woman and demanded wedding gifts from all the men of his kingdom. Perseus, having no wealth, boasted that he would bring any gift the king desired, even the head of Medusa the Gorgon. It was a foolish, arrogant boast, the kind young men make without thinking. But Polydectes seized upon it immediately, seeing his chance. So be it, the king said with a cruel smile. Bring me the head of Medusa, or do not return to Sorrowful at all. Perseus realized too late what he had committed himself to. Medusa was one of the 3 Gorgon sisters, monsters whose gaze could turn men to stone. Many heroes had attempted to defeat her. None had returned. The path to her lair was said to be marked by stone statues of those who had failed. But Perseus was the son of Zeus, and the gods sometimes took an interest in their half-mortal children. Athena appeared to him, offering guidance and gifts. She gave him a polished bronze shield, bright as a mirror. She told him to use it to view Medusa's reflection rather than looking at her directly, thus avoiding her petrifying gaze. Hermes also came to Perseus, offering winged sandals that would allow him to fly, and a special sword sharp enough to cut through the Gorgon's neck. He directed Perseus to the Graeae, 3 ancient sisters who shared a single eye and tooth among them, who would know the location of Medusa's island. Perseus journeyed to the Graeae and, through trickery, obtained from them the location of the island and information about Hades' cap of invisibility, which he would need to escape after slaying Medusa. Armed with divine gifts and knowledge, Perseus set out across the sea toward the lonely island where Medusa had lived in exile for decades. Medusa knew nothing of this, of course. She went about her days as she always did. Rising at dawn. Tending to her simple needs. Sitting at the entrance of her cave in the evenings, watching the sea change colors as the sun set. On the day Perseus arrived, the weather was beautiful. Clear skies, gentle breeze, the sea a deep blue that reminded her painfully of the Aegean around Athens, the home she had lost so long ago. She sat at her usual spot, the snakes on her head moving lazily in the warm air, and watched a ship in the distance. But this ship did not pass by like all the others over the years. This ship changed course, heading toward her island. Medusa's heart, which had grown accustomed to a slow, steady rhythm, began to beat faster. Someone was coming. After all these years, someone had sought her out intentionally. She knew what this meant. She was not naive. No one came to a Gorgon's lair with good intentions. Someone had been sent to kill her, to take her head as a trophy, to prove their heroism by destroying the monster. She felt a strange mixture of emotions. Fear, certainly. She did not want to die. But also something almost like relief. The endless, lonely years could finally end. And perhaps there was even a small, bitter satisfaction in it. Let them try. Let this hero, whoever he was, attempt what so many others had attempted. He would fail, and he would become another stone statue decorating her island, another monument to the futility of opposing her cursed existence. But underneath all of that, there was a deep, aching sadness. Because this meant that even after all these years, even after decades of harming no one, hiding herself away from the world, she was still considered a monster that needed to be destroyed. She retreated into her cave and waited. Perseus approached the island cautiously. He had heard the stories, seen the evidence of Medusa's deadly power. The shoreline was littered with statues, stone figures frozen in various poses of terror or aggression. Failed heroes, every one of them, turned to stone in the moment they had looked upon the Gorgon's face. He wore Hades's cap of invisibility, concealing himself as he made his way inland. The island was desolate, barren, a fitting home for a monster. But as he walked, he found himself wondering about the Gorgon, about the woman she had supposedly once been. Athena had told him little of Medusa's history when she had given him the shield. Only that she was a priestess who had defiled a temple and been justly punished. But Perseus, young as he was, sensed there might be more to the story. The gods were not always forthcoming with the whole truth, especially when it might make them appear less than perfectly just. He found the cave system easily enough. There was only one set of caves on the island large enough to shelter a creature like a Gorgon. He approached slowly, carefully, holding Athena's shield before him like a mirror, looking only at reflections, never directly ahead. Inside the cave, Medusa sat in the darkness and listened to the footsteps approaching. She could tell he was trying to be quiet, trying to sneak up on her. She almost laughed at the futility of it. She had lived alone on this island for decades. She knew every sound, every echo. She had known he was there from the moment he stepped onto the cave floor. But she did not move, did not speak. Let him think he had the advantage. It made no difference in the end. Perseus crept deeper into the cave, his eyes fixed on the bronze shield, watching the reflections. And then, in the polished metal, he saw her. Even in reflection, even cursed and transformed, there was something striking about her. The serpents on her head moved with an eerie grace. Her face, though partially obscured by shadows, seemed almost sad rather than monstrous. She sat very still, not attacking, not threatening, simply waiting. Medusa, Perseus called out, his voice echoing in the cave. He was surprised by his own words, surprised that he had chosen to speak rather than simply attack. I have been sent to take your head. I do not wish to fight you, but I will do what I must. Medusa laughed, a sound rusty from disuse, bitter with decades of pain. "How noble of you," she said, her voice rough but still recognizably human. "Another hero come to prove himself by killing the monster. Tell me, boy, what is your name?" "I am Perseus, son of Zeus and Danae." "Of course you are. A demigod. They always send demigods. Tell me, Perseus, son of Zeus, do you know why I was cursed? Do you know what crime I committed to deserve this existence?" Perseus hesitated. This was not how these confrontations were supposed to go. The monster was supposed to attack. He was supposed to defend himself, to be the hero saving the world from a terrible creature. But Medusa simply sat there, speaking to him in a voice filled with such weary sadness that he felt his certainty waver. "Athena told me you defiled her temple," he said finally. Medusa's bitter laugh echoed again. "Yes, I suppose that is one way to tell the story. Let me tell you another way. I was a priestess, devoted to Athena, sworn to chastity and service. Poseidon desired me. I refused him. He took me anyway, violently, in Athena's own temple. And for being the victim of a god's assault, Athena cursed me into this form and exiled me to this rock to live out my days in isolation and misery." Perseus stood frozen, still watching her reflection in the shield. Could this be true? Would the gods truly punish a victim for the crime committed against her? Yes, he realized with a sinking feeling in his stomach. Of course they would. He had seen enough of divine justice to know that the gods cared more about their own pride and rivalries than about fairness or compassion toward mortals. "I am sorry," he said quietly, and he meant it. "That is unjust. That is cruel beyond measure." "Yes," Medusa agreed softly. "It is. But it changes nothing, does it? You still have your mission. You still need my head to save your mother from an unwanted marriage. The gods have arranged everything very neatly. They always do." "How did you know about my mother?" Perseus asked, startled. "I did not. But heroes always have noble reasons for doing terrible things. A mother to save, a kingdom to protect, a maiden in distress. The gods give you just enough justification to live with yourselves afterward. But tell me, Perseus, when you take my head back to Seriphos, when you use my cursed gaze to turn your enemies to stone, will you think of me? Will you remember that I was once a woman who wanted nothing more than to serve her goddess in peace?" Perseus had no answer. He stood there, invisible in his cap, shield held before him, sword at the ready, and found himself unable to move forward with what he had come to do. Medusa sensed his hesitation. "You cannot save me," she said gently. "The curse cannot be broken. There is no happy ending to this story, no redemption, no justice. There is only the ending the gods have written. So if you must kill me, I ask only that you make it quick. I have lived in this cursed form for longer than you have been alive. I am tired, Perseus. So very tired." Something in her voice, in the profound weariness of it, made Perseus's decision for him. This was mercy, he told himself. He was ending her suffering. It was not murder but release. He circled around behind her, still invisible, still watching only her reflection. She did not resist, did not try to turn and attack. She simply sat there, head slightly bowed, serpents writhing softly on her head. "Thank you," she whispered, so quietly he almost did not hear it. Perseus raised his sword. In one swift motion, guided by the reflection in Athena's shield, he brought it down. The sword, forged by Hephaestus himself and given to Perseus by Hermes, cut through Medusa's neck cleanly, easily, as if her flesh were no more substantial than morning mist. Her head fell from her shoulders and rolled across the cave floor, coming to rest facing away from Perseus. The serpents on her head continued to writhe for a few moments, then gradually stilled. Her body collapsed, and from the blood that spilled out emerged two beings, Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chryse, a giant wielding a golden sword. They were Poseidon's children, conceived during that terrible assault in Athena's temple, somehow trapped within Medusa's body until her death released them. The irony was not lost on Perseus, even in that moment. Medusa had been punished for being violated, transformed into a monster, and now in her death, the evidence of that violation emerged for all to see. The god's justice was indeed strange and cruel. Perseus carefully picked up Medusa's head by the serpents, taking care not to look at her face. Even in death, the curse held. Her gaze could still turn living things to stone. He placed the head in a special bag he had brought for this purpose, a gift from the gods that would contain the curse. Before he left the cave, Perseus paused. He looked at Medusa's headless body, at the dark blood pooled around it, at the life he had just ended. He thought about her story, about the injustice of her curse, about the decades she had spent in lonely exile for a crime she did not commit. "I am sorry," he said again to the corpse. "You deserve better than this. You deserve better than all of it." There was no response, of course. The dead do not speak. Perseus turned and left the cave, left the island, left Medusa's body to the elements and the sea birds. He used Medusa's head well, as she had predicted. He rescued his mother from Polydex by turning the king and his supporters to stone. He later used it to save Andromeda from a sea monster and turned a rival suitor to stone at his wedding. Every time he used it, every time he saw men transformed into stone by that cursed gaze, he thought of Medusa and felt a pang of guilt. Eventually, Perseus gave the head to Athena, returning it to the goddess who had cursed its owner in the first place. Athena mounted it on her shield, the Aegis, where it remained as a symbol of her power and protection. And that is where Medusa's head remained for the rest of time, or at least for as long as the gods maintained their power. The face that had once been beautiful, that had belonged to a devoted priestess, became a symbol of protection, warding off evil. There is a bitter irony in that too. The victim became the protector. The wrong became the weapon. As for Medusa's sisters, Stheno and Euryale, they mourned her death. They were immortal and had survived while their mortal sister perished. Some versions of the story say they hunted for Perseus, seeking revenge, but never found him. Other versions say they simply returned to the edges of the world to grieve in private for the sister they had lost. The island where Medusa had lived remained deserted. Her body was never properly buried or burned. It simply decayed slowly in the cave where she had made her home, returning to the earth over months and years. The cave became a shrine of sorts, though whether it was a shrine to remember a monster defeated or a victim wronged depends on who tells the story, and so ends the tale of Medusa, from her birth as a beautiful mortal woman, through her years of devoted service to Athena, through the violation that destroyed her life, through the unjust curse that transformed her, through the decades of lonely exile, to her death at the hands of a hero who felt sorry for her even as he killed her. It is not a happy story. There is no redemption in it, no justice, no happy ending. It is simply a tragedy, one of many that occurred when gods and mortals interacted, when divine pride and power met mortal vulnerability and suffering. If there is a lesson in Medusa's story, perhaps it is this: that the powerful often punish the powerless for the crimes of other powerful beings. That victims are blamed for their victimization. That beauty can be both a blessing and a curse. That justice does not always prevail, especially when the gods are involved. Or perhaps the lesson is about the nature of monsters. Medusa became a monster not because of anything she did, but because she was made into one. She was forced into that role by powers beyond her control. And yet, even as a monster, she retained her humanity, her capacity for reflection and sadness and weariness. The question becomes, who was really the monster in this story? The woman who was cursed for being assaulted? The god who assaulted her? The goddess who punished the victim? The hero who killed her to save his mother? The answer, like most answers in Greek mythology, is complicated. Everyone was a victim of circumstance, of fate, of the way the gods had arranged the world. Everyone was doing what they thought was right, or necessary, or justified. And yet the suffering was real. Medusa's pain was real. Her lonely decades on that island were real. Her death was real. The stars wheel overhead now just as they did then. The sea still crashes against rocky shores. And somewhere, in the realm of the dead, perhaps Medusa's shade has found some measure of peace that eluded her in life. Perhaps she has been reunited with her sisters, or with other priestesses who served faithfully and were betrayed by their gods. Perhaps death was kinder to her than life ever was. Or perhaps there is no peace even in death for those cursed by the gods. Perhaps she simply exists in the grey twilight of the underworld, still bearing the serpents on her head, still isolated, still punished for a crime she did not commit. We cannot know. The gods do not tell us everything. The stories come down to us incomplete, filtered through thousands of years and countless retellings. But Medusa's story remains, a reminder of injustice and cruelty, but also of endurance and dignity in the face of unimaginable suffering. So let us remember her not as the monster from the stories, the scary creature that heroes must defeat, but as the woman she was. Medusa, the priestess. Medusa, the devoted. Medusa, the victim. Medusa, the exile. Medusa, the survivor who endured decades of cursed existence with what grace she could muster. Let her rest now. Let the snakes on her head be still. Let her sea green eyes close in peace. Let her story be told truthfully, with compassion, with recognition of all she suffered and all she endured. The night is deep now, dear listeners. Your breathing has slowed. Your body has relaxed into the comfort of your bed. The story has wound its way through ancient Greece, through temples and islands, through transformation and tragedy, to this quiet moment. Let Medusa's tale drift through your thoughts as you drift toward sleep. Let her story remind you that there is always more to know, more depth to understand, than what appears on the surface. The monster in the myth was once a woman who loved and served and hoped for nothing more than a life of peace and purpose. Sleep well. Dream peacefully. And perhaps spare a thought for all the Medusas of the world, those who have been wrongly blamed, unjustly punished, transformed by forces beyond their control into something they never wanted to become. Good night.